All right, here's the plan. To start things off, I'll begin by telling you a little bit about exactly why I am recording this video for you today and how the information within it can truly help you in your daily life. My goal is to give you some genuine motivation to listen closely and really engage deeply with the specific things I'm going to talk about. After that, I'll spend a few minutes talking in detail about the fascinating way the human psyche works, specifically the part of it that is responsible for our self-image and how our autobiographical memory works and how these are interconnected, how our self-perception is linked to our autobiographical memory. And finally, probably the most important part for me and possibly for you as well is that I'll talk about an exercise that I'm currently working on. It's still in the process of development, but I'm already using it now. And this exercise will help you better understand yourself and, as a result, achieve your goals more effectively. So, let's get started. What is my personal motivation anyway? And maybe you'll also find yourself motivated to listen to me and try to understand what I'm talking about. And here's the motivation: to achieve my goals more successfully, more efficiently. We, as an organism, the human organism, one of its basic components, so to speak, is the drive, the movement from the actual to the desired. Our behavior is built on this. We have goals and we achieve them. If we really very roughly simplify the whole situation that we find ourselves in, that's it. During this transitional movement from the current state of reality to the desired outcome, there is a critical moment when our brain carefully selects a specific strategy for action. When it has already decided what it wants, when it realizes that where it is now does not match the state the organism wants to be in. One of the stages is choosing an action, in other words, how exactly to achieve the goal. And this stage of choosing a strategy is built upon, or rather depends on, two things. The first thing is previous experience, and the second thing is the ideas about the world that our brain possesses. And part of this world is the brain itself. Our brain has this magical ability to give an account of its own existence to itself. And one of these stages, within this stage, when the brain chooses a strategy, it looks at its strengths and weaknesses. To understand its strengths and weaknesses, it is important for the brain to know itself. And in fact, this is the main goal that I adhere to in my life. Education is very important for this so that we can better understand how we are structured. And so that our brain, when it solves its everyday tasks, doesn't have to guess, but knows what works and what doesn't. This is my personal motivation, and I want to share with you the insights I've made recently while reading specialized literature on psychology. By observing myself and doing various practices and exercises, including an exercise that I compiled and created myself from different sources and from my own understanding of how the psyche works. Now, let's take a moment to discuss a few words about what psychologists are specifically referring to when they talk about the self, and what I am going to be referring to when I talk about the self. So, what exactly do we mean by the term self? In our common everyday language, and in our ordinary daily lives, we often use this specific term, even though in reality, what actually and physically happens, in the way we casually talk about it, and in the way we consistently use it, this very self does not exist. As they say in a more technical or scientific language, our self does not possess its own independent ontological reality. What does that mean in plain language? In plain language, it means that there is no separate organ in our body that creates the self. There is no specific area in our brain that is responsible for the self. What actually happens is that there are separate areas in our brain that perform different functions. When they start working together, like an ensemble, this sensation is created and the self emerges. To better explain what I mean, I'll use a metaphor. Our self is somewhat like a basketball team. A basketball team does not exist by itself. There are individual players, And the team comes into existence when these players start acting together as a unit to achieve a specific goal. And it's the same with our self. It doesn't exist until the separate areas of our brain, the players, begin to act together. And why do they act together? They act together in order to achieve a goal. And this is also a very important concept and meaning that needs to be understood. Our organism does not exist just for the sake of existing. It does not. Our memory, our attention, our body, they are meant to help us solve evolutionary tasks. And one of the main evolutionary tasks, probably the main evolutionary task, is reproduction. But within the framework of this larger task of reproduction, our organism achieves intermediate goals. And there are many of these intermediate goals. And humans are very complex, a very complex organism. Not only do we have our genes, but we also have a very complex environment around us, which we have created for ourselves. It is called society, the culture in which we live. And this too is part of the game that influences our behavior. And within this culture, it also sets certain goals for us. That's why this global goal of reproduction is often even unconscious. In life, we solve other problems. For example, I have the task of paying for my apartment. To accomplish this, I need to go to work. As part of going to work, I need to complete projects and fulfill tasks. I have a lot of tasks. I need to answer phone calls, schedule meetings, write programs, and arrive at work on time. And all of this comes down to the smallest tasks that I solve right here and now. Putting a sock on my right foot, making coffee, waking up, going, getting to work, and turning at the right place. This is part of the task I solve in order to accomplish a larger, more global task. And when we look at all of this from the outside, we see that our body is always within a context of a certain hierarchy of tasks. And within this hierarchy of tasks, something is formed. Our self. We have many selves, and they are shaped by the tasks we solve. Within this approach, psychology has the concepts of the working self and working memory. But what does memory have to do with all this? Memory is also a tool that developed in the course of evolution. This tool helps us keep track of the intermediate state of solving tasks. I need to remember that I have to send a letter. I need to remember where I parked my car. I need to remember that I have coffee on the stove. Our memory helps us solve problems, including long-term autobiographical memory, which I'll get to a bit later. But right now, I want to shed a little light on this point, that we have a working self that exists within the framework of the hierarchy of tasks, the local one that I am currently in. This working self lives for about 2 minutes, roughly as long as our working memory lasts, which actually has a very, very limited capacity, very limited. This is the amount of space into which you can fit all these intermediate statuses of problem solving, the goals we are striving for. And this is also very closely related to short-term working memory, which, right here, right now, we are holding these intermediate stages of problem solving. For example, right now, I have a plan for how I will present this video, and I have to keep in mind where I am in relation to my plan. In this context, you are now seeing Victor and my working self, which switches on when I explain things to people, when I act as some kind of teacher, and when I explain something at work, a different self is at work. In a family context, yet another self is at work. When it comes to my hobbies and interests, a different self is at work. We always have this, the context in which we find ourselves. So there's no need to be afraid of split personality. It doesn't happen. The brain is responsible for making sure it juggles all this and doesn't get confused about where I am and where not I is. But that's a completely different topic. Right now, I'm primarily talking about a healthy brain and how it functions. So we've established that we have this brain that always works within the context of tasks, and it makes sure that our consciousness doesn't let in things that are irrelevant. Things that aren't relevant to solving the current task don't get through. So what does long-term autobiographical memory have to do with all this? Long-term autobiographical memory is a very interesting thing that apparently only humans possess because working memory exists in other animals. Long-term autobiographical memory. Apparently, it exists only in humans. And this is one of the latest achievements of evolution. And our brain works very hard in order to use this tool effectively. During experiments, it was discovered, and I think you yourselves have probably noticed this in everyday life, that when we are immersed in our memories, our brain is unable to do anything else. We all know what it means to get lost in our thoughts, as they say. Most often, these are memories, missing a turn, forgetting about some other task. When it comes to autobiographical memory, when a person recalls an event from their long-term memory, it takes the brain several seconds to do this. In comparison, for example, when the brain just needs to understand someone's speech, it only takes a fraction of a second, and our brain handles this very easily. But when we need to look into our own memory, our brain practically directs all its cognitive resources specifically to this task. This is very hard work. So I am slowly approaching the part where I will describe the exercises. But before I describe this exercise, I want to talk a little about how autobiographical memory works. Then you will better understand what this exercise is actually about and why it works. So, how is our autobiographical memory structured? It is essentially made up of two parts. There is this working self, which I mentioned briefly. This is the personality that exists in the context of the task, and its attention is focused on those things that are relevant to specific tasks, and only those things that are relevant enter both attention and memory. On the other hand, in autobiographical memory, there is what psychology calls a knowledge base. This is everything that has accumulated. And everything that has accumulated is also not random. We don't have random memories. All the memories we have in long-term memory are, in one way or another, connected to our goals. And now, looking a little ahead, why is my exercise focused on this? It is focused on helping a person get to know their autobiographical memory better, to see what is recorded there so that they can better understand what their real goals are, so that they can understand which goals are truly important for their personality and which are not. Because we now live in such an information-rich environment that it is very easy for us to get confused about this, about what we truly need, which goals we are pursuing for ourselves, and which goals we might actually be pursuing for completely different people. And another point is that our brain evolved over time, and for the most part, it had to survive in life-threatening conditions. In conditions of great danger to life? Now, in modern society, the risk to life is much lower, and our brain often switches on the mechanisms it once used to survive in the environment of hunters and gatherers. Now we live in a different environment, and we need to develop other adaptation mechanisms. And in fact, when I read psychology literature, when I record videos, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm simply doing this for myself. I'm developing and suggesting that you also develop more effective adaptation mechanisms, more effective ways to achieve your goals in modern society, where there are no saber-toothed tigers, but there are completely different challenges. So let me return once again to this picture where we have autobiographical memory, we have a knowledge base, and we have a working process that records something into the knowledge base and retrieves things from it. I'm simplifying things a bit. There are aspects that are more detailed in terms of how all this works. But my video currently has other objectives. For me, my goal is to explain to you how all of this is actually implemented at the level of brain neurons. Moreover, not that much is actually known about this. I want to share something with you so that you develop an understanding that will help you achieve your goals more effectively. So then, within our autobiographical memory, in this extensive personal knowledge base, information is organized and stored on a variety of different hierarchical levels. And why exactly is it like this? There are reasons for this, but perhaps I'll record a separate video later where I'll explain in detail how it came to be that these layers exist. For now, I'll just describe these layers so you can better understand the overall picture. At the lowest layer of our autobiographical memory, episodic memories are stored. Episodic memories are based on images about 80% of the time. For example, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was, at a picnic. I have many episodic memories, images. I remember where it was. I remember the little clearing. I remember the grill. I remember the people. I remember what clothes I was wearing. I remember the colors. I remember the surroundings. And all of these are images. Besides that, there is a second layer in my memory. Above the episodic memories, I have the very fact, the conceptualization, that I was at a picnic. And this part, apparently, only humans have this part, because episodic memories exist in other animals as well, it seems. But the ability to conceptualize memories, apparently, is unique to humans. It's hard to verify whether animals have it, but humans definitely do. And this has been demonstrated largely through the study of people with brain injuries and those suffering from amnesia. People with amnesia often cannot recall an episode. Specifically, they can't reproduce it in memory, but they remember facts well, they remember events. For example, a person with amnesia may not remember what their apartment looks like, but they know that the apartment is in a certain city, for instance, or they know that they are at a certain time they bought another apartment, or that they studied at an institute, or what their profession is. They don't remember specific details that are based on images, but they do remember the facts themselves. Therefore, it is very important to understand that in our brain, there is a layer of episodic memories, specific ones, but it is always tied to conceptualization, to concepts, to a kind of extract, like a summary, a conclusion drawn from the memories. This is very important because this is how the brain conserves energy. And with just this one event, for example, going on a picnic, there can be many, many, many episodic memories associated with it. Stay with me, I will gradually lead you to the exercise. And everything will more or less fall into place. Why, in fact, do we need to know this? Why is this important? I think it's important simply because it's interesting. But for those who are more practically minded, perhaps when I write the exercise and you try it, you will understand. Basically, it will click for you, and you'll see what all these reflections are leading to. That's it. That's not all. There are more layers. There is yet another, a third layer to our knowledge base. To our autobiographical knowledge base, this is the layer that unites events. This layer is also divided into several parts. There are themes. For example, I have the theme, my family life, my professional life, my hobbies, my studies in psychology. These are different perspectives within which there can be several events. But the most important thing, and this will also come up sooner or later in the exercises I'm doing now, we have periods of life. All of us, in one way or another, and this has also been shown in many experiments, when people recall events from their lives, they always know that each event, including episodic ones at the very lowest level, is always tied to a certain period of life. A period of life has a beginning and an end. And this is a reference to topics, goals, and task hierarchies. Something like, periods of life are most often connected to changes in our tasks. When does a major node change for us? With these kinds of tasks, for example, when a person moves to another country or starts a family or changes jobs, an entire layer of the task hierarchy shifts and a new stage of life begins. And overall, their knowledge base is restructured. Our psyche, in fact. In many ways, our psyche protects us from this. One of the mechanisms of our working self is that it has a sort of motive, you could say, for self-preservation. We don't really like major upheavals. We don't like it when our major hierarchies change. Of tasks, for example, now, with the development of artificial intelligence, many people genuinely feel threatened. And in a way, it's justified because they realize that it's quite possible that what they've spent many years learning, and this was a major node in their task hierarchy, could simply become irrelevant at some point. They will have to restructure their psyche. It really doesn't like that. Really doesn't like it. What our psyche enjoys most is when we have a long-term significant goal, when the steps to achieve it are clearly visible, these small subtasks are understandable, and the entire path to the end is apparent. Then we can calmly proceed and tackle these tasks. That's why, in fact, So our psyche likes computer games because everything there is clear and predictable. That's it. Well, I digressed a bit. Getting back to these periods of life, as I mentioned, which are based on these major changes. By the way, one of the sub-exercises is to make your biography according to these periods of life, to understand the events that happened during them, and to better grasp which goals changed, what actually changed. What specific significant event in your life ultimately brought about the end of one distinct chapter of your existence and the beginning of another? Now I'm gradually moving on to the last part of the video, where I want to talk about this exercise. I want to start off by giving a bit of a disclaimer. This exercise involves engaging in a process of looking very deeply into yourself, the entirety of your life, and your personal memories. And for people such as those who are living with mood disorders, with mania or depression, or with bipolar disorder, I would recommend first consulting with a psychologist to see if you should do this, because it can, well, be dangerous. Perhaps you will consult with a psychologist. It's always good to consult with a psychologist, and maybe you'll want to do this exercise together with them, or maybe you won't want to do it at all. But for brave people and for those with a healthy psyche, I highly recommend this, because it will equip you. In scientific terms, this is called metacognition, when your brain knows itself better, its strengths and weaknesses, navigates its own experience more effectively, and understands its real motivations and goals more clearly. This is very useful. They can make life better than just good. So now I'm moving on to the exercise. What does it consist of? I'm going to give you the first simplified version of this exercise now. I'm working on deepening and expanding it. Later on, it will be available, and I'll turn it into an algorithm, so to speak, a step-by-step guide on what to do. But what should you do right now? Here's the first version, the beta version of the exercise. Take 20 sheets of paper. It's better to use small cards. You can use 20 sheets of A4 paper. The number 20 here isn't magical, it's just big enough, not too small and not too large. So you could take 15 or 20 or 18, it's not a big deal. No need to worry. Better to have more than 10, but 30 is already too many. And it's unnecessary. You'll understand why in a moment. Look, you take 20 sheets of A4 paper, blank on both sides. So, what do you do next? You make 20 self-representations. What does that mean? Here's an example of a self-representation. For example, I am a programmer. I write, I am a programmer on one of the sheets. On the second sheet, I write, I love music. I love psychology. I am a husband. I don't know, play badminton. Anything at all. This is called self-representation. When you say, I am, it can be a fact, it can be a profession, it can be an opinion, it can be an adjective, a description, anything at all. Even if, first of all, it's important not to think too long. Second, if you feel like you're writing something like, I am a flying cow, no big deal, just write it down. That is, it just slipped through your mind. Sometimes anything at all can be in our minds. Write it down. Later, at the next stage of this exercise, the things that are irrelevant to you, that don't connect with you, will fall away. And this is actually one of the beauties of this exercise. It sometimes allows you to understand yourself better. I wrote down some things about myself that I thought, well, this is me. But then it turned out that, well, maybe it's not really something that affects me that much after all. So you've written out 20 self-representations. You have them in a stack. You shuffle this stack, shuffle it well so that it ends up in a different order, not the order in which you wrote it. Now you have these 20 things. What do you do next? You take a card from the stack, read the self-representation you just wrote, unfold the sheet, and you recall your episodic memory. Remember, I told you episodic means something specific, some particular event where you were present in which you still have a mental image. You write, you remember, you recall this event, and then what do you do next? You don't write it down as you would in a diary. Instead, you write 1, 2, or 3 words, a concept, just the essence of it. For example, I'm a programmer. I'll use this example. I've already worn out my self-representation quite a bit, but let's say I write, I'm a programmer. I read, I'm a programmer, and I need to recall events. I have an event that I remember connected with the first thing that comes to mind related to this It's about how I learned programming, how I studied how a computer works, sitting in the kitchen at the computer, studying materials, listening to courses. I remember exactly. I even remember which course I was listening to. That's it. And I can conceptualize it, say, self-learning in the kitchen. In a nutshell, yes. It's important that it's brief, in a couple of words, without details. So no pictures, no description of reality. There was something like that. Yes, exactly, in a couple of words. All right, I've written it down. Next, I take another self-representation, sit down, read it, and try to recall an episodic memory. If you feel that after 5, 6, or even 10 seconds, an episodic memory doesn't surface, nothing comes to mind, just some conceptual generalizations spinning around in your head, but you can't recall a specific event. That means this event, apparently, this self-representation, it's not really yours, so to speak. Because what I'm describing is a little different in form. This kind of research was already conducted about 50 years ago. It's history now. These studies have been around for about 50 years, and it was shown that if an episodic memory doesn't quickly come along with the self-representation, it means that this self-representation is not formative, that it's not particularly important. So set aside those self-representations for which you don't recall an episodic memory. By the way, what's interesting is that it was also shown that people with depressive disorders have trouble recalling episodic memories. In general, this applies to most of their self-representations. But for now, I am specifically addressing more of those individuals currently living without a formal diagnosis, just everyday people who are deeply interested in psychology and personal self-development. So let's look at those specific pieces of paper where you have a self-representation and you easily recalled an episodic memory. You write down the episodic memory in the form of this concept on the back side, importantly, on the back side of the paper. Again, you went through all the papers, great, you shuffled them. You shuffled all the papers. You set some aside, and now you have a stack of papers where there is a self-representation on one side and a concept on the other. What do you do next? Do you stack them into a pile? In such a way that all the papers are facing up with this concept so that the self-representation I am a programmer is at the bottom, and on top it says self-learning in the kitchen. Wonderful? You take the first paper. Well, they're all shuffled again in random order. You take the first paper, you read this concept. If you can't remember which self-representation this concept belongs to, you set this paper aside again. This is also a good indicator that the very representation you wrote down hasn't quite developed yet. So to speak, it's not entirely yours. It's not that close to you yet. Right now we're working with what is truly genuinely yours. Great, you see it written down. I'm self-taught in the kitchen. You remember, okay, that's me as a programmer. What do you do next? You write down 2 numbers there. The first number. This is the year when the episodic memory took place. Sometimes it's hard to remember. It seems to me that this event, when I was self-learning in the kitchen, I think I was about 25 years old, most likely. Maybe 23, 24, or 25. Well, I have a feeling it was somewhere around that period. I write down the year when I was 25 years old. The second number I write. Oh, my phone is dying. I need to finish the video quickly. So, anyway. The second number I write is the year, again, the year that is personally associated for me with self-representation, when it appeared. Again, as I said, my self-representation is I am a programmer. The year when the event happened, I was 25 years old. But in fact, this identity of mine, being a programmer, appeared, or rather, I decided it appeared when, for the first time in my employment contract, it was written, I am a programmer, all right? It can be different for everyone. Actually, you can think about it here, where and when you decided that this self-representation is truly yours. So you write down 2 numbers, and then once you have these 2 numbers, that's when things get really interesting. Because you look, again, during these experiments and studies, it was discovered that where is the episodic? This event that happened? When this event is close to the moment when this very self-representation appeared, when they're near each other a year or 2 apart, these are truly the most self-forming moments. Self-representation. This is what is closest to you. What is farther away is also important, also interesting. It's especially interesting when, for example, the event is episodic. It happened much earlier and the personality developed later. Or on the contrary, the personality developed first and then the event that brought about change for you happened later. It's all about how to work with this further. There's a lot of interesting things there. But to start, I advise you to do this. Do the work, write down 2 numbers, calculate the difference between these 2 numbers, and sort these cards by that number. That is, the cards with the smallest difference are on top, and the ones with the largest difference are at the bottom. And you'll see what is closer to you, what is less so, what shapes you, and what doesn't. The most interesting thing is that if you do these exercises at different times of the day, not just the time of day, but more importantly, at different moments, like during your workday, on the weekend, while you're relaxing, on vacation, or somewhere else, you'll notice differences. Because, as I already mentioned, we are always within the framework of our specific context. For example, if I were to do this exercise right now, the self-representations I would come up with would be different from those that I would write if, say, in the middle of a workday, someone interrupted me and told me to write self-representations. They would be different. And one of the goals of this exercise is that if you do it at different times of the day and at different periods of your life, in different contexts, you will notice that different self-representations appear in your mind. But if you do this exercise once every couple of weeks in different contexts, you will gradually, so to speak, cement yourself, and you will have a good understanding of what is happening to you, and your brain, in many ways, even unconsciously, will know itself better. I'll finish this video with this fact. Again, research has shown that people who are focused on themselves, who are focused on their own feelings, on their own goals, are happier. They achieve their goals better and go further. So I wish you success, and I'll see you in another one. In a video where I'll talk in more detail about some other things. Good luck.